Hello, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. I hope you enjoy listening to books. Today, I'm going to interpret a book for you called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, subtitled The Triumphant, Turbulent Stories Behind How Video Games Are Made Paperback. When we talk about game development, we're referring to those electronic games we play on computers and gaming consoles. You might wonder, why has game development become synonymous with a sweatshop? Sure, we're all aware that the tech industry involves long hours, but isn't game development a creative industry? Some even rank it as the ninth art, following literature, music, dance, painting, sculpture, theater, architecture, and cinema. So, how did game development, supposedly a bunch of people working overtime on artistic pursuits, turn into a sweatshop? Actually, it's not just our misunderstanding. The author of this book, Jason Schreier, initially didn't understand it either. He's a tech journalist currently working for Bloomberg and has contributed to renowned media outlets like Wired and the New York Times. He's extensively covered the gaming industry and culture, making him somewhat of an insider. But in the foreword of this book, he admits that his impression was of game development being a gathering of 20-somethings, eating pizza, drinking soda, listening to rock, coding all night, and sleeping through the day, a mix of pain and pleasure. However, in order to write this book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, he conducted interviews with over 100 individuals in the gaming industry, mostly developers. He discovered that game development was nothing like he'd imagined. Almost everyone he spoke to emphasized how challenging game development was, with one developer even saying, "Any game that gets made is a miracle." So, why is game development so tough? After reading this book, I found 4 main reasons. Firstly, the biggest characteristic of electronic games is interactivity. Unlike linear mediums like animated movies such as Toy Story or Finding Nemo, where everything you see is pre-designed, in games, every player action demands a response. If a player wants to go behind a house, developers have to design a scene for that specific action. This significantly increases the workload, scenes to cover, and issues to check for in-game development. Secondly, the core value of electronic games lies in being engaging and enjoyable. However, due to this interactivity, the real measure of whether a game is fun happens when you actually play it. This elusive sense of fun heavily tests the developer's creativity. Thirdly, the business of electronic games has grown enormously. For instance, the 2018 release of Red Dead Redemption 2 has sold over 46 million copies, generating sales exceeding $1.5 billion, almost rivaling Hollywood blockbuster earnings. Consequently, the investments required to achieve these figures have been immense. This game took 8 years to develop, involved over 3,000 people, and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Thus, modern game development has become a large-scale project with long cycles, high investments, and massive teams, leading to exponential project management issues. Fourthly, technological advancements in electronic games progress rapidly, with major updates every few years. The book uses a metaphor to describe the speed of technological iterations. Game development is akin to making movies, but each time, you need to create an entirely new camera. Technology from 3 to 5 years ago is already outdated. Therefore, every game development cycle involves catching up with new technology. In summary, while game development is a creative industry, as the market expands, it requires increasing funds, manpower, time, stringent project management, and the ability to keep pace with technological advancements. Game developers now need to balance creativity, engineering, commerce, and technology. If any aspect falls short, the game development process could fail. So, how do game developers manage this incredibly difficult task? What methods do they use to balance creativity, engineering, commerce, and technology? This is precisely what makes Blood, Sweat, and Pixels invaluable. Even if you're not a gamer or part of the gaming industry, don't worry. Firstly, I won't bombard you with a list of game titles and jargon you're unfamiliar with. Secondly, in this era, everyone's work is transitioning from a singular focus to balancing multiple dimensions. Though industries differ, the methods game developers use to juggle various dimensions might still provide insights. Next, let's assume you and I have started a game development studio. We'll walk through the game development process, exploring the challenges and the methods used to tackle these problems. Part 1 now. Let's say our game development studio is officially established. The first issue encountered is rather practical, as most developers worry about one thing: where does the money come from? Establishing a game development studio burns through funds. In the United States, on average, such a studio spends about $10,000 per employee each month, covering salaries, office rent, employee health insurance, and more. In essence, a 100-person game studio's annual expenditure reaches $12 million. You might not think a 100-person studio is sizable. I looked it up. Microsoft oversees over 20 game studios, where those with 100 employees are considered small. Studios with 300 or 500 people are the main force, and there are even large-scale studios with 7,000 to 8,000 staff. You can imagine the massive expenditure these studios incur annually. In most industries, to create products in such conditions, one needs investment from major players like Microsoft. This means only mature, well-known teams get the entry ticket, leaving no chance for others to enter. However, the gaming industry has its quirks, leaving a small opening for those others. This aspect, summarized as scalability, becomes crucial. As we mentioned earlier, game development needs to balance multiple dimensions. Yet, balancing isn't necessarily a burden, it can also be a breakthrough. If one can flexibly maintain multiple dimensions and elongate advantages in a particular dimension when facing challenges, it can compensate for shortcomings in another dimension, maintaining overall competitiveness. In the gaming domain, this elongated dimension often revolves around creativity. As long as the creativity is robust, the business dimension can be appropriately compressed. To what extent can it be compressed? The book features a story about an individual's game development studio, starring a person named Barong. Barong, a fresh graduate in computer science, adores a game called Harvest Moon. In this game, you play as a farmer, cultivating crops and tending to animals while befriending townsfolk. However, by Barong's graduation in 2011, this beloved game was already from the previous century. Though there were sequels, their quality didn't match the original, and the market hadn't seen a similar genre game since. With idle days spent job hunting, Barong had an idea: he wanted to create an exceptional farming-themed game himself. An average game development team involves dozens, if not hundreds, of people, and for a major game, it might even require thousands, including global outsourcing. Yet, Barong intended to handle all the tasks alone, writing every in-game dialogue, crafting each image, and even coding the game from scratch. This approach not only cut costs but also allowed him complete creative freedom without coordinating with others or adhering to their schedules. Barong initially believed that with a few months' effort, he could create the game, sell it online for a few dollars each copy, and potentially earn around $1,000. It would satisfy his interest and make a little profit, a decent small project. Barong's one-person game development studio officially commenced work. His routine involved waking at 8 a.m., brewing a pot of coffee, then diving into game development, working from 8 to 15 hours a day. Programming, illustrating, composing music, all were solely managed by him. Whenever he encountered something unfamiliar, he resorted to online tutorials. For a one-person studio, achieving intricate, realistic 3D graphics was challenging. Hence, Barong opted for a cartoonish style, reminiscent of old-school pixelated electronic games. However, this style evoked a sense of nostalgia and catered to casual gamers like him, who missed the simplicity of Harvest Moon in the gaming world. A year and a half later, Barong's efforts started to bear fruit. He launched a website to promote his new game, named Stardew Valley. The website received better responses than Barong anticipated. Many players reminisced about the joy of playing Harvest Moon and eagerly anticipated Barong's new game. This feedback spurred Barong on even more. Not long after, a small game studio called Hee Hee Fish contacted Barong, deeply interested in his game. Despite being a work in progress that occasionally crashed, it impressed everyone at Hee Hee Fish. Although Hee Hee Fish was a small studio, it had a professional legal team and public relations experts. They offered to assist Barong with legal and promotional work and only asked for a 10% share in profit. It was a sincere proposal as major game publishers often demanded higher revenue shares, sometimes up to 60%. Delighted, Barong accepted, allowing Hehe Fish to handle the game's distribution, thus solving his final development hurdle. By 2016, after 4 years of development, Barong's game finally launched. As it turned out, Hehe Fish had a keen eye. The game sold over 1 million copies within a few months, and to this day, it has sold over 20 million copies. With a price tag of $15 per copy, the 10% share made Hehe Fish immensely profitable, turning Barong into a multimillionaire. He single-handedly created not just a good game but also a legendary chapter in gaming history. Barong's story proves the existence of scalability in the game development field. A one-person game development studio could still succeed. However, individuals like Barong, who single-handedly craft games, are absolute rarities. Most games still require a team effort. Can a multi-person team utilize scalability to compensate for business shortcomings? The next story I'll tell you will answer that. The protagonist is a small studio of over 100 people, named Obsidian Studio. Though Obsidian Studio isn't large in size, it's quite renowned in the industry and among old players. Its founders and core members, engaged in the gaming industry since the 90s, developed games at their previous company that left a lasting impact on the industry, such as Fallout and Baldur's Gate. These games significantly influenced later electronic games, particularly role-playing games, akin to how Lord of the Rings shaped Western fantasy novels. This clarifies the esteemed status of Obsidian Studios' founders. However, during their heyday, the gaming community wasn't as vast as it is today. Hence, despite their status, the founders hadn't accumulated much wealth. When they decided to start on their own, they struggled financially for a while. For quite some time, they only managed subcontracting work, developing games for other companies, earning a meager living. At one point, they received sponsorship from Microsoft, but eventually, even Microsoft parted ways with them. At that point, the studio was on the verge of collapse. Obsidian Studio resembled a skilled swordsman from an era long gone, capable but unappreciated, struggling even to work as a bodyguard. They felt that to turn things around, they needed to develop a game that truly showcased their skills. Even if it had average profitability, it could save their relatively small studio. However, game development always requires initial funding. Where would they get this money from? Obsidian Studio had an unconventional idea: crowdfunding. They wanted players to invest in their game's development. Within 2 months, they devised a plan to create a role-playing adventure game reminiscent of the old days but utilizing contemporary technology, which was their forte. The day the crowdfunding project went live, the founders were apprehensive. Unexpectedly, on the first day, players responded fervently. Hundreds of dollars poured in every minute, accumulating $700,000 within a day, and eventually, they raised $5.3 million online in a month. With this funding, they created a game named Pillars of Eternity, fulfilling their initial promises and earning numerous gaming industry accolades that year. Years later, Obsidian Studio initiated a crowdfunding project for Pillars of Eternity 2, collecting over $1 million within a day. Although Obsidian Studio didn't rake in big profits, they managed to survive, continuing to do what they excelled in and loved, providing joy to a group of players and setting a benchmark in the gaming industry. Earlier, we mentioned the first challenge game developers face: money. We must acknowledge that finding simple, effective ways to gather funds is challenging. However, the gaming industry provides us with an insight: projects that require balancing multiple dimensions often possess scalability. When encountering challenges, elongating the advantages of one dimension to compensate for the shortcomings of another dimension maintains overall competitiveness. Part 2. Alright, assuming our game development studio has sorted out the financial side, we're finally ready to get down to business. Everyone is eager and ready to create an entertaining game. However, a new issue arises: what truly makes a game fun? Our game development studio likely houses numerous talented individuals, all presenting various creative ideas that sound equally enjoyable. Yet, this is the most challenging aspect of game development: sifting through countless ideas to find the most suitable one, then focusing and continually developing it. Why is this the most challenging? As mentioned earlier, game development consumes both time and money. However, determining if a game is truly enjoyable usually requires hands-on experience. If we rush into developing a particular idea without testing it, the game might turn out to be unenjoyable with no turning back. Hence, the pressure in selecting the right idea is immense. So, what's the solution? Is it merely luck? Not at all. I consulted a friend who works in electronic game development, and he offered a unique perspective. He likened completing a game to drawing a large circle. However, game development doesn't start with drawing the whole circle, it starts by finding the center and then drawing a small circle. Whenever problems arise during the process, they're quickly addressed. After finishing the small circle, they assess its quality. If the small circle turns out well, they draw a slightly larger one, encountering more challenges but resolving them along the way. This process continues until they achieve a circle that meets their expectations. Using this method of starting with a small circle, there's a chance that the allocated time might end before completing the large circle. However, at least there's a smaller, complete piece of work. If time is incredibly limited, using the smaller circle can fulfill the most critical requirements. If time allows, there's room to continue expanding on the large circle. But if, as we imagine, one starts by drawing the large circle immediately, there's a risk of running out of time before completing it or, worse, ending up with a distorted and ineffective circle. In the book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, this approach is validated. I found that successful games were developed using this method of starting with a smaller circle before expanding. The center of that circle is finding the game's core mechanic. The core mechanic in a game refers to the basic operations players repeatedly perform throughout the game. Let's take a classic game example, Super Mario. The core mechanic of this game is jumping. Mario, when jumping, can defeat enemies, break bricks, overcome obstacles, and find treasures. That's the core mechanic of the game. If this core mechanic is engaging, then the game's soul is found. But how do you find this core mechanic? It's not so much about generating new ideas. Through a brainstorming session, many new ideas can be conceived. What's truly difficult is identifying which idea, when put into practice, is genuinely engaging. Innovation isn't merely about proposing a new idea but successfully implementing it for the first time. To filter out practical and exciting ideas, game development studios create a small area of the game, disregarding art design. This space is like a square box. Within this space, they experiment, testing all the seemingly exciting ideas one by one, identifying the truly enjoyable ones. This is the center of the circle. Once they find this center, they proceed to verify and expand from the small circle to the large circle. Nearly every game development team interviewed by the author organizes weekly play tests where all team members test newly developed models, discarding those that aren't enjoyable. Then, the game development team presents a larger, first playable version, which is essentially a prototype of the game, to further test and verify. Following this stage, there are demos and beta versions showcased to players for early feedback, continuously iterating until the final official release. In the process of game development, while an outsider might think the hardest part is generating good ideas, in reality, the most challenging part is selecting the idea worth investing time into. The real challenge isn't in divergent thinking but in convergence. A noteworthy aspect is the game development strategy of starting with a small circle before expanding to a larger one. I've noticed that in nearly every creative industry, there are experts who follow this approach. As an example across disciplines, I once asked a seasoned architect how to assess the quality of a housing design. He advised me to observe whether the residential community has more or fewer unit types. Surprisingly, higher design quality often correlates with fewer unit types. The ideal scenario is to have one unit type for large, medium, and small areas. Experienced design firms usually focus on perfecting the unit type first, finding a layout that's practical and doesn't waste space. Based on this, they decide the layout for a floor or an entire building. If a residential area has 8 or 9 unit types, it might seem diverse in choices, but the time allotted for each unit type during the design process is limited, likely resulting in less detailed considerations. When expanding to a floor or building level, more issues might arise. Corresponding to the game development strategy, a reasonably utilized space in a housing unit is the core mechanic of a residential community. Experienced design firms first perfect this smaller circle before extending it to a larger one. You see, when an industry needs to achieve a balance between good ideas and systematic engineering, the game development strategy of starting with a small circle before expanding could be applied elsewhere. Part 3. So, assuming our game development studio has resolved the financial issues and created the game. Does everything go smoothly once the game officially launches? Are you and I expecting, like mentioned earlier, to sell 20 million copies and count money every day at home? Not quite. Even with exceptional ideas, until the game reaches the players, success isn't guaranteed. Conversely, even if a game faces failure after release, there might still be a chance for a comeback. This book chronicles the story of a game that faced a crisis upon release but managed a successful comeback, Diablo III. The Diablo series is incredibly famous. The first generation, released in 1996, caused a huge sensation, while the 2000 release of Diablo II was a global hit. When I graduated from college, I spent nights playing Diablo II. I believe this game remains etched in the memories of many. So, in 2012, after 10 years of development, the highly anticipated Diablo III was about to be released, and players worldwide were buzzing with excitement. Compared to the games we discussed earlier, Diablo III had a very optimistic outlook. Its development studio was Blizzard, renowned for games like StarCraft and World of Warcraft. Blizzard was a company rich in both money and creativity. Furthermore, the Diablo series had a massive player base. To build momentum, Blizzard organized a grand official launch event. On the day of release, it seemed like a player's carnival. Everything appeared smooth, waiting for massive sales. However, unexpectedly, on the release day, Diablo III brought significant disappointment to its fans. The reason for this disappointment wasn't that the game wasn't enjoyable but that it was practically unplayable. When players opened the game, it required a server login to start. However, every player encountered a baffling message: server busy. Please try again later. The development team never imagined that their game would be so popular that their servers wouldn't handle the immense load. After overtime efforts, 48 hours after the game's release, the servers finally stabilized, allowing players to enjoy the game relatively undisturbed. However, by this time, many players had lost their patience. They questioned Blizzard's decision on forums. Why complicate things with a server login when they could have released a standalone game? This became the first public relations crisis after the game's release. When players finally could access the game, the second PR crisis emerged. As mentioned earlier, each game has its core mechanic. The core mechanic of the Diablo series is adventuring, monster slaying, and leveling up. Players explore dungeons, gain more experience by killing enemies, acquire better equipment, and challenge stronger foes. However, in Diablo III, players found the game difficulty to escalate too quickly, and good equipment drop rates were too low. Players were frequently killed by enemies. How to get stronger? The game had an auction house system where players could purchase powerful gear with real money. Players mockingly said that Diablo III became a pay-to-win game. To become powerful quickly, one didn't need to adventure in the game but simply open their wallets. The core mechanic was disrupted, and player trust collapsed. While the previous game was a milestone in gaming history, this one turned into a money-grabbing scheme, causing players complete outrage. Within a month of its highly anticipated release, Diablo III faced a significant PR crisis. Blizzard's response was to publicly promise players a long-term plan to gradually optimize the game and enhance its entertainment value. Blizzard realized that mere small fixes wouldn't resolve players' complaints, they needed to perform major surgery on the game. However, for such an overhaul, Blizzard needed a reason: enter the new expansion. If you're not much into gaming, let me explain what an expansion is. An expansion is a way for game developers to serve players. It involves developing an extended version based on the original game, adding new characters, storylines, gameplay, and more. Usually, expansions supplement the original game, making it more comprehensive. However, Blizzard aimed to use the expansion release to perform a comprehensive transformation on the game. With this second chance, Blizzard could rectify the server busy issue and reassess what made the game fun. After re-evaluating the game, the focus was on one word: randomness. Randomness had always been a characteristic of the Diablo series. Diablo was an adventure game where the thrill lay in exploring maps, defeating enemies, getting better equipment, gaining experience, and challenging stronger foes. However, unlike other adventure games with pre-designed maps and enemies, Diablo was different. Maps were randomly generated, enemies were encountered randomly, and the loot dropped by enemies, its functions, everything was random. Hence, even on the same map, every entry was a different experience. Players hoped for a chance to get exceptionally powerful equipment. But Blizzard realized that in Diablo 3, this randomness became annoying. There's an inside joke circulating in Blizzard, an anecdote about the chief designer of Diablo 3 playing the game for 104 hours but only obtaining a single legendary item, the highest tier gear in the game, and worse, the item didn't suit his character, rendering it useless even if acquired. The development team resolved this critical issue while radically adjusting the game's difficulty system. When the expansion was released, players found that loot in the game no longer required real money and instead became exciting discoveries during exploration. The game's difficulty became more balanced, and Blizzard added richer maps and quests. Ultimately, Blizzard made a determined decision to permanently close the auction house system. These efforts gradually won back players' disappointed hearts. Over 3 years, Diablo 3 sold 30 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling video games in history. Diablo 3 serves as a typical example to answer the question we posed at the beginning: how can game development find a balance between creativity, engineering, business, and technology? Despite appearing complex, the core revolves around one focal point: the core mechanic. Finding it through creativity, reinforcing it with technology, implementing it with engineering, and securing it with business. So why did a studio like Blizzard, experienced and financially sound, take 10 years to develop Diablo 3, yet still face a reputation crisis? Because initially, short-term profit-driven business goals disrupted the game's core mechanic. How could they, seemingly when everything settled after the game's release, manage to salvage players' hearts? It's because they used immense determination and investment to rebuild the game's core mechanic. For those in other industries, this revelation is also insightful because not only games have their core mechanic. In this era, any product that increasingly faces users surely has its core attraction point. Find it, and you find the balance across multiple dimensions. Here we are, concluding Jason Schreier's Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Game development is a creative industry, but as the market grows, it demands more resources, funding, manpower, time, becoming a vast and meticulous project. It's a business venture that requires careful measurement of input versus output while keeping pace with technological advancements. Balancing creativity, engineering, business, and technology has become the ultimate challenge for modern game developers. Any deficiency in these areas can lead to failure. This is the biggest hurdle in game development. We've traversed the path of game development in the first person. It has given us new perspectives, such as the scalability of projects that require consideration across multiple dimensions. Strengthening one aspect can compensate for a deficiency in another. It has also provided insights. The innovation process isn't about the proliferation of ideas but their convergence. Starting small and expanding gradually exposes key difficulties and surfaces good ideas, making the road to innovation more efficient. There have been thrilling turnarounds, exemplified by Diablo 3, which, over 3 years post-release, proved that even an initially flawed game can transform into an excellent one with sufficient time, dedication, funds, and sincerity. Diablo 3 serves as a quintessential example to answer the initial question: how should game development find equilibrium among creativity, engineering, business, and technology? Although seemingly complex, the core revolves around one focal point: the core mechanic. Lastly, I recommend a game called Game Dev Country, playable on your phone. This isn't an ad, I suggest it because it transforms the game development process into a game itself. While its style is exaggerated and humorous, it provides insights into the successes and chaos behind game development. It explains why game development is so challenging yet attracts numerous individuals because creating truly provides an incredible sense of accomplishment. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom with practice, achieve our financial goals, and create a better future together. Thank you all, goodbye.